Hello and welcome to Wilson Center Now, a production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. I'm John Molesky. My guest today is Messay Gobena. Messay is a Southern Voices Network for Peacebuilding scholar with the Wilson Center's Africa program, also a PhD candidate in Peace and Security Studies at the Addis Ababa University Institute for Peace and Security Studies in Ethiopia. His Wilson Center project is titled Countering Transnational Organized Crime as a Strategy for Peacebuilding in East Africa. Messay, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
So help us define the problem. How prevalent and problematic is transnational organized crime in East Africa?
Yeah. Transnational organized crime in East Africa is basically an emerging crime. Especially it is a post-Cold War phenomena. There is, after the Cold War, there is globalization, and the globalization creates free movement of people, is free movement of goods, and there is individuals can easily communicate through information technology. And one of the drawbacks of globalization is expansion and growth of the illicit networks. And Eastern Africa is also part of this problem, and there are a number of criminal networks there that basically engage in different kinds of criminal activities like human trafficking. Number of East Africans are trafficked either to the Middle East or they are either trafficked to the Europe and to the US. And there are crimes like related to drug trafficking. A number of drugs are basically trafficked through East Africa, either to South Africa or sometimes to Europe. And there are also crimes like against wildlife, like animal poaching and others. This number of criminal activities are now expanded and emerging across the East African region.
Are these criminal activities exclusively outside the government, or is there overlap? Are there corruption issues as well?
Yeah, in East Africa, the states are very fragile and the state institutions are very, very weak. And there is also problems of corruption. When you see the Transparency International Corruption Index, almost all these countries are below the minimum standard at the index. And sometimes, as I identify in my research, these are a number of corruption elements are there, basically used to facilitate the criminal activities to perform there.
Mm-hmm. Is when looking for solutions, or is it best to think country-specific or best to think regionally?
There are two types of dimensions. One, country-specific is also good important because there are specific crimes basically related to specific countries. There are also, because the nature of the crime is borderless and transnational, it needs a regional solution as well. Then in some instances we can promote a country-specific solution. In other circumstances we can also promote regional or sometimes even international response is required to combat the problem of transnational organized crime on the region.
Is there enough regional coordination to effectively address issues in a comprehensive or a coherent manner?
The problem in East Africa is that there are a number of regional institutions. Basically, the countries basically are become a member of several regional organizations. Some, for example, they are member of the Intergovernmental Authority on Development. Some also they are member on the East African Community. This creates an overlapping of mandates and duplication of jurisdictions. This basically creates a problem on coordination and cooperation of these countries on combating of this crime.
Well, you mentioned globalization and the unintended consequences. Sometimes it can cut both ways. There are always other countries involved. It's just the world we live in. Is it more of a help or a hindrance in this regard? External players.
There are external players there. We can categorize them as some of them will help in fighting this crime, and some of are basically engaged in exacerbating of the problem. For instance, one of the help is the help that is basically given by the US to the East African region. For example, the US is highly engaged in combating of drug trafficking in Kenya and in fighting of Al-Shabaab as a terrorist group. Al-Shabaab, as my research finding indicates, that Al-Shabaab is not only a terrorist group, but it is an organized criminal group that basically engaged in several types of illicit activities in order to finance its operations. Mm-hmm. Therefore, the US is highly engaged in combating of Al-Shabaab. Basically, it has also its own effect on preventing of the illicit business that Al-Shabaab runs on the region.
What are some of the most effective strategies that are being undertaken currently?
A number of countries have their own initiative to combat this crime. They have established their own normative frameworks. They have enacted a number of domestic laws. and they are be domesticated or ratified different international treaties. They establish their own institutions to fight the crime, uh, and but here the problem is that there is no strong institution that basically uses it to fight and combat this crime effectively, and there is a problem of coordination and cooperation among countries. This also are some of the problems that I want to mention.
In addition to the lack of strong institutions, what about the context of, it's said that crime doesn't pay, but in certain contexts it might for some people. Is there enough incentive to address the problem among the players on the ground, whether they be governmental or non-governmental, if people are profiting from some of the activities?
Basically, the here in combating and fighting of transnational organized crime in East Africa is considered as a law enforcement work. The police, the intelligence is highly engaged in combating this crime. But I believe that combat transnational organized crime is not only a mere law enforcement issue, but it is political commitment. Political commitment is more important to combat this crime than legal commitment, because some of the crimes are basically linked to individuals who are in office. They are either they are part of the profit, or sometimes they are corrupted by the criminals. Therefore, having strong political commitment is more important than the law enforcement issue only. In different countries, when we see in East Africa, the mandate is exclusively given for the law enforcement sector.
When you talk about political commitment, are you talking about sort of political will, a combination of leadership and civil society on the same page? Or is that what you're describing?
Yeah, basically, politically, politicians has to be very committed because some of their members could be part of the problem. Therefore, identifying and arresting and bringing them to the law is also one issue that requires strong political commitment. Second is the nature of the crime is committed in clandestine nature. Basically, individuals cannot easily trace it. Therefore, having strong law enforcement that conducts strong intelligence, plus allowing the civil society and the media to conduct investigative journalism and advocacy of against the crime is important to combat and prevent the crime in the region.
How close are you to, will you have a final report at the end where you'll have a list of specific recommendations like some of the ones you just listed?
Yeah.
Can you share some others with us that you haven't had a chance to discuss yet?
Yeah, basically I have several recommendations, but the basic one is, the first I think is that combating of transnational organized crime requires a shifting of thinking and attitude, especially from the politician's perspective. The politicians must view that transnational organized crime is a strategic challenge for the political, economic, and social stability of states. It is not only a mere law enforcement issue. It requires a strong political commitment to fight and combat that. After changing their view and attitude to organized crime, the second issue is that there are international known counter strategies of transnational organized crime. Therefore, if they believe that organized crime is a strategic challenge for their political existence, implementing the internationally known counter strategies of transnational organized crime is also important to trace and identify, and finally to defeat the criminal network in the East African region. And thirdly, I believe that the civil society as well as the media has to be given freedom in order to conduct investigative journalism and advocacy for the against the proliferations of illicit networks in the region. And finally, I want to say that here there is also an issue of Al-Shabaab basically connected with the issue of AMISOM as well as the UN Security Council. The UN Security Council has a plan to close the AMISOM mandate by December 2021.
2021?
Yeah. They are fighting Al-Shabaab as a terrorist group in different military fronts, but Al-Shabaab still persists and conducts a number of massacres in different cities of Somalia and Kenya. Therefore, before attempting or thinking about closing of the AMISOM mission in Somalia, defeating Al-Shabaab is important. In defeating Al-Shabaab, defeating the financial resource of Al-Shabaab has to be given a prior agenda.
Well, thank you very much for all this valuable information you've shared today. And before I let you go, I want to ask you about your experience at the Wilson Center and your involvement in the Southern Voices Network. And if you could tell us if that's been useful to your work.
Yeah, my involvement and engagement in Wilson Center is good for me. Basically, I have get a number of scholars and practitioners on the area who basically create engagement in how to address the issue and how to conduct research on the issue. plus the way that Wilson Center are engaged scholars is also good. Basically, hearing the Southern voice is also, I think, it is important for the American or for the U.S. policymakers to address the Southern issues.
Well, Messay, thank you. Great to have you here today and great to have you at the Wilson Center. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you as well. Hope you enjoyed this edition of Wilson Center Now and that you'll join us again in the future for another installment. Until then, for all of us at the Wilson Center, I'm John Molesky. Thanks for joining us.